let's move on to the letter you wrote to the World Economic Forum that on Africa that took place in Cape Town in September. You wrote yet again, it's not the first time, about how we South Africans seem to be stuck in negative stuff while there's potential for good, and how we don't see that we've actually improved despite the challenges.
Well, Dan, I think it's a very complicated issue. I mean, the country has considerable problems and real challenges, and we know that poverty and inequality and joblessness and all the things we've spoken about. But I kind of wanted to put across the issue that as humans we kind of coded for this concept of declineism. We think that our environment is getting worse invariably, and wherever you go in the world people tend to think things are getting worse when in fact they're getting better. So if you look at the big statistics about the world, it's quite amazing. 90% of people think the world is getting worse, when in fact the major indicators of economic growth, of extreme poverty, of illiteracy, of life expectancy are getting better. This is work done by people like Bill Gates and Steven Pinker. It's excellent work. The interesting thing is that South Africans are the worst at this. We suffer the most declinism. We think things are getting worse, and we're most wrong against these statistics. So the point I was trying to make was not about ignoring our problems. They're real, and people are really struggling in the economic environment today. But we get our country often wrong. There are big things we're improving in. The economy is bigger than it was. That's a reality. People are living longer. Infant mortality is down. Literacy rates are up. Formal housing is up. So many big indicators are better. And I guess my appeal is that when people have the right attitude, you can deal with the fundamentals. And trying to get across the narrative that this is an important time for us to seek some of the positives in our very special country in addition to these challenges, because I think we're going to get better results out of that. And particularly as leaders, we have to create a different narrative.
But there's been a recent surveys done that show that from the business community, that's your space, people think risk is worse than, political risk is worse than it was 3 years ago. And they still have no hope today. They don't want to invest in South Africa. So, I mean, why is that? I mean, you as a businessman, your own peers are seeing it differently, but you're seeing it that, no, guys, things are getting better. We must invest in the country. That's what you said in the letter.
Well, I'm not saying things are actually getting better as opposed to worse. I'm making the point that there's a lot of challenges and problems, but at the same time there's a lot of positives. And I think as leaders and as individuals, we have to seek out the positives as well and balance them off. I think you make better decisions in that regard. The problems themselves, I think we have kind of a mindset that smooth sailing is the norm and problems are an aberration. It's the other way around. Problems are the norm. There's always from one problem to the other, and I think we have to accept that. But I think my central kind of thesis or plea is to be attitudinally seeking the positive in addition to understanding the problems. I think that it's attitude that drives fundamentals, not the other way around. You don't get the fundamentals right and then you're happy about things. So our best chance of getting through our problems is to actually understand the scale of our country. I think people don't understand this. Gauteng is I think the size of Kenya and Ethiopia added together. I think Cape Town, the Western Cape, is bigger than Ghana. 80% of the continent's pension assets are sitting in South Africa. It's a highly sophisticated country that with I think the right attitude and leadership could solve these problems, and I think that's critical.
Right attitude and leadership, but if you look at the latest BER research or Sakelicha research from business, they don't seem to be displaying that right attitude. Or how would you encourage them to change their attitude?
Well, I'm trying to make the plea that precisely because because of these kind of surveys and clearly how people feel, this is a time for leadership, and not just in government, in business, to try and change the narrative to one of how we solve our problems, to formulate the problem differently, as to, given all that we have here, these are problems we can solve, rather than the sense of inevitable decline. Just evidence that we're just heading, the country's not necessarily in decline. As I said, we look at the key statistics, and we have to fight hard against that declinism.
Now, if you look at, I'm sorry to harp on this, if you look at how business is responding, there was an investment summit, and there was a job summit. There's been so many summits where South African businesses put up their hand and said to President Ramaphosa, we will support you. But when you look at the numbers themselves, including the research that's coming out, the economic activity is not bearing that. Our businesses will go, say we are there, they leave the conferences, but they don't really put in the money. Why is that, do you think?
Look, I think first you have to be fair. There is a very tough economic cycle globally. So there are cycles to this, to what we're dealing with. It's very tough at the moment. On the other hand, I'll also say to you, since this article, I've had so many business leaders say to me, we're very supportive. We need to change the narrative.
But shouldn't they show the support by putting the money where their mouths are, so to speak? Because otherwise, I'm sitting outside as a non-business person. I'm going to think business is being disingenuous.
I think it's more complex than that. I don't think that businesses are rational corporates with boards and decision making. These things take time. I do think with the right narrative, with the right leadership, with policy certainty, not just in government, in all different areas, you will get that investment. We as a corporate are investing heavily. We're building a bank, as you know, in very difficult times. I mean, I'm convinced it's in difficult times that prices are depressed, opportunities are underpriced, people are distracted. This is a time to invest. But that's our view, it's a tactical thing. But I don't think there's kind of a point of proof. I think it's a complex sea of emotions that we have to change.
Now, to change emotions, to change mindset is not easy. In the letter to the World Economic Forum on Africa that you wrote recently in Cape Town, you make a plea for vision-based leadership. What is vision-based leadership?
Well, I think it's easy to lead through negative stuff. The world's terrible. Follow me. You know what I'm saying to you? It's not. It's powerful, but it's wrong. I think great leaders create hope and vision. They frame a future. They give people hope. That is, to me, the central role of leadership. Not reckless hope, not irresponsible, naive. I'm saying to you, here's a problem. We can solve it collectively. And I think that kind of leadership is needed throughout society. And I'm not suggesting I know how to do it. And it's not kind of lingo. I'm saying I think leadership needs to give people a hope of the power of our country, the power of potential. And critically, I think we need to frame the future. We need to frame what's possible. I think that's so critical in this environment.
Are leaders currently framing things that are possible properly, in your view?
I don't think so. I don't think we have a frame. I think the frames we deal with are negative. The frame of kind of inevitable decline is a negative issue. I think we need to frame what's possible and take people towards that. And I think that's possible. I think the President certainly can do that. I have great faith in him. I think he can do that. I think business leaders need to do that. But we need activity. We need to move. And the status quo is not acceptable.
I wonder if your colleagues are listening to you and your plea, because if business must show faith in President Cyril Ramaphosa and his plans, we should actually be seeing the money happening. Because jobs need to be created. We need to give hope to people to say, your daily life must not just be a meaningless grind. We need to be there. But I'm keeping on going back to say it's a pity from where I'm sitting that business doesn't seem to be doing the same. You are one of a rare kind at this moment in South Africa.
I'm pretty sure there are many, many potential opportunities of business. If I think of us in the banking space, we're entering into a very competitive space. Our competitors, the big banks, are moving at such a rate to try and stop us, and that's a healthy thing for society. They're innovating, they're changing, they're investing. I don't see a completely stagnant environment where you know what I'm trying to say to you? I'm in the cut of thrust of things, and things are hectic, So, so I think there's a cycle to the process. And I'm not sure you can. It's not a binary issue. Are they investing or not? I think there's a hugely competitive environment that is moving, and I think you should give it time.
How do you respond to the fact that 70 billion rand in 2016 was invested by South African companies overseas, offshore, instead of here, and then that led to descriptions of an investment strike by corporate South Africa?
I guess that's proof of my plea. I'm kind of saying you've got to change the attitude. I mean, markets are rational, corporates are rational. They will go where the opportunities are. If that's what they're seeing, that's proof of what I think is problematic. So I'm it's not a plea. My sense is that with the right attitude and narrative and creating opportunity, we can do the opposite, and that's what we have to do.
Now, finally, Mr. Gore, the gap between perceived risk and real risk. From what you've been saying, it looks like sometimes our businesses and us as individual South Africans, we think, hey, the risk is too big. But you think it's not like that. The gap is smaller?
I'm intrigued. If you look at our GDP, it's growing. It's not growing enough. It's not growing at all, and that's a big problem. But in fact, its kind of growth rate is it's like kind of a lazy athlete. It's fairly stable. If you look at other economies, certainly emerging economies, they move up and down, they go higher, which is a good thing, but often really crack. This is like quite a robust but lazy growth rate. You know what I'm trying to say to you? So it's an interesting dynamic. There's more robustness here than we give it credit for, but we've got to get the growth up.
Okay. If you were Finance Minister, National Treasury Head, Tito Mboweni for one day, what would you do?
I like the elements of the Minister's plan, I like some of the thinking, and I'm in the business sector, but I, in leadership, would be focusing in addition on sentiment, working out ways to give people hope and vision. I'm a deep believer that giving people a sense of hope and vision, realistic hope of what's possible, drives the fundamentals, not the other way around.